Hey there everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Building an MMO series, where we're going to be talking about combat in MMOs. We'll be getting into the past favorite of the tab targeting MMO, the new favorite of the action combat MMO, and my personal favorite, the hack and slash model. But before we get into that, I got to apologize for the long break between this video and the last one. I've just had a lot of trouble getting these videos out with my schedule, so we're going to be kind of changing up how the videos are coming out. I'm no longer even going to try and get out 2 videos per week. I'm definitely just going to stick to 1, and it will kind of flip between which channel's which, depending on what content I have better ideas for at this time. And I'll try and throw out a few extra little videos here and there to kind of pad out the gaps. For that 1 video a week, I'm going to really try and aim for 10-minute videos, whether it's on this channel or the other one. And for any extra little videos I put in there, they can be any amount of time. They could be a 20-minute video or a 2-minute video. But I just want to throw them in there to make it so it's not such a long wait between videos. So again, I'm sorry for the long wait between this video and the last one, and for not meeting the schedule I put forth, but hopefully it'll show as a good choice in terms of quality. On a happier note, I did get a new webcam for Twitch streaming. So now on the Twitch streams you can see me while I game. I don't know if that's a good thing, but you're getting it, so I hope you like it. So now without further ado, let's just jump right onto the video, and we'll start off with the tab targeting MMO. For those who don't know, the tab targeting MMO is games like World of Warcraft, and it's basically an MMO where you can click on an enemy and the game will lock you onto them. Once you're locked onto an opponent, you can use whatever moves you want, and the majority of them will automatically hit them. You could fire an arrow, and even if they move, that arrow will curve and hit them. Some people like that, some people don't, but that is basically what a tab targeting MMO is. The few exceptions to that rule of automatically hitting them would be things like area effect abilities, and certain moves that just don't automatically target a player. You get the name tab targeting MMO from the ability to click a button, which is usually tab, to switch between targets in your field of vision. So any enemies that are around you, you can click tab and the game will jump to another target one after another, and you can keep fighting without ever actually having to put your hand on the mouse. Now I'm going to start by saying tab targeting is probably my least favorite style, so my opinion is going to be clouded by that, and you should know that some people don't share my opinions, and that some people actually really enjoy tab targeting MMOs. The millions of fans of World of Warcraft would be a pretty good example of that. Now, I'm not just going to totally crap on tab targeting MMOs the entire time. There are a few good things I would like to share about tab targeting MMOs. The first and probably biggest thing I would have to say about them is that they can actually be a smart form of combat. An important part of combat is the things that come before combat, like choosing your armor and your weapons and your movesets. In these terms, the average tab targeting MMO is actually way above the other types of MMOs out there. If you want to use World of Warcraft as a prime example, there is a lot of armor and weapons out there for you to choose from. There is also a ridiculously large moveset for you to choose from with a lot of different class options. This means that someone with strong math skills can actually apply those skills to their character to go into a combat situation with the best advantage over their opponents. This makes everything that comes before combat very detailed in the tab targeting MMO, and that's a really strong selling point for them. Now, I can't ignore another good thing about World of Warcraft and other tab targeting MMOs, and that is that they have extremely large movesets, and very frequently you will see players who have, 3, 4, 5 hotbars with all filled up with different moves, and these moves are each used in different situations in the game. If you're fighting one opponent, you may use one bar. If you're fighting another opponent, you may use a different bar, and you might have a third bar for your support skills and a fourth bar for your defensive skills. And this means in combat you have a lot of choices. And that is a really strong thing in favor of tab targeting MMOs. Now we're getting into the things that are kind of wrong with tab targeting MMOs. And that is they can be quite unengaging. Except for in boss fights or very difficult fights, you will not have much reason to move as a character. And you'll just be using your moves for everything. Since everything is locked onto opponent and everything the opponent does is locked onto you, there's just no incentive to move or to dodge or any of that kind of thing. If you're playing a ranged character, you might hold the S key to back up continuously, but in the end that's not really the same thing as having to make conscious choices to move or to dodge an ability. This is where tab targeting MMOs really lose me, and it's just that they can be so repetitive at times. They can be so boring as you just launch the same set of moves at an opponent, and then once that opponent dies, you've locked onto the next opponent and you use those exact same moves again to beat them. And there's not a lot of variance in it. You either win or you don't. So overall, you can say that tab targeting MMOs do a great job on the little details, but not such a great job on the combat itself and keeping things fun and engaging while you're fighting. Now we're going to move into the action combat MMOs. Now, if tab targeting was the old favorite and used by games like World of Warcraft and its various kind of clone games, the new favorite would be the action combat MMOs, and you see that in games like Guild Wars, WildStar, and ESO, as well as other games to come out in more recent years. It's a little trickier to describe action MMOs since they're not all fixed to the same standard. Neither are tab targeting, but it's a lot closer between the different tab targeting games. Action MMOs may have a lock-on feature, but very frequently they do not. Moves do not lock on the same way, but sometimes they do. Moves may or may not lock on to an opponent, and an opponent may or may not be able to dodge them depending on the move. But overall, there's a lot more variance. When I was talking about tab targeting MMOs, I used an archer shooting an arrow as an example, and I'm going to go ahead and just use that one again. In an action MMO, you may have an archer shoot an arrow at an opponent. If they did not have the opponent in their crosshairs when they fire the arrow is usually just going to go straight off into nowhere. In other cases, you may have it where if the opponent was in the target reticle at the time of shooting, then the arrow will lock onto them and will not miss them. And again, in other cases, you may actually have to hit the opponent with the arrow when it's shot. So you shoot the arrow, and if they step out of the way, the arrow will miss anyways. Or if they step into the way, the arrow will then hit them. And similar rules can be applied to generally all the skills in action MMOs. And the big selling point for action MMOs is that the majority of moves that an opponent can use on you, you have the ability to dodge out of the way or step out of the way. And it just creates a lot more engaging combat in terms of having to be right there in that moment and paying attention to what's going on around you. You can't just click buttons, you have to know what's going on. This generally leads to a feeling that the fights in action MMOs are a lot faster. Even if a fight takes the same period of time, it feels like it's going faster, and it feels like there's more going on. The funny thing is very frequently that's actually not true. Very frequently there's less things going on, or a smaller variety in things that are going on. I was saying how a tab targeting MMO has a lot of things going on before the fight, with a lot of options. There was a lot of different armor and weapons and moves that you could choose from. Action MMOs tend to have a lot less options in that field. There's usually less choices in terms of your armor and your weapons and your movesets. Very frequently, you'll only have one hotbar in action mode because you have to focus more on what's going on in the fight, rather than the variety of moves that you have. You don't solve a fight with a different moveset, you solve it with better reflexes or better timed attacks. Now, I prefer to be more in the fight and use a smaller moveset rather than a larger moveset and be more detached from the fight. But I can't pretend more options in terms of moves would not be interesting to me while playing an action MMO. And that really boils down to the action MMO. It's a lot faster and more engaging in the combat itself, but it gives you a lot less choices and kind of takes away some of that smart gameplay that you have before the fight. Now we're going to get into my personal favorite, the hack and slash model of combat. You don't actually see this in MMOs very much, at least not the mainstream ones. You do see it in some of the indie titles and kind of pseudo-MMOs. By pseudo-MMOs, I mean MMOs that are not really massively multiplayer, persistent worlds, but smaller server-based worlds. Describing hack and slash is actually really simple. It's basically combat that emulates real combat from past eras. Very frequently there'll be a medieval setting with swords, shields, spears, bow and arrows, crossbows. Maybe sometimes there's guns involved, like muskets or whatever, but it's generally the classic medieval setting. The good things about hack and slash MMOs is definitely beginning with the fact that it's fast. You're hard pressed to find any combat system where you're more engaged in the combat itself than with hack and slash. In properly made hack and slash systems, you're not just flailing moves at each other or sword strikes at each other. You usually have the option to block opponents' moves or strike from other angles, and when the opponent blocks, they have to match that angle. They can't block left when you're striking right, that kind of thing. And this means that skill becomes a very big factor in these games. The ability to recognize the telegraphing of opponent's move before it happens is a big factor in whether you'll win a fight or not. And the reflexes to then act upon it and then strike yourself in ways that will get around the opponent's defenses is really what determines whether you win a fight or not. Now, I really can't say that without pointing out a really big flaw in the game, which some people may argue is not really a flaw, but I do recognize it as one. And that is that skill gap is a huge problem in hack and slash games. It can sap a lot of the fun away for people who are not as good at reading those telegraphs or who do not have the same kind of reflexes as other people. I can attest to this personally because I've never been very good with the directional block systems, so I've always used a shield to make up for that because they do not require you to block directionally. I think that at the same time, though, shows just how fun these systems can be. Because even with me not being a top player in these games, I really love them, and I love that personal feeling that comes from a fight between you and another person. You just really cannot match that in action MMOs or tab targeting MMOs. I suppose I should bring out that bow and arrow example again just one last time to describe how targeting works in hack and slash games. In hack and slash games, there's definitely no question to how the targeting works with ranged combat or melee combat. You use a move, and if it doesn't strike the opponent, it doesn't count. When you shoot an arrow, you will likely have to arc it to hit an opponent, and if it misses the opponent, then it doesn't hit. It doesn't curve to follow them, it doesn't do anything to help you. This definitely makes it a very rewarding feeling when you pull off a tough shot, though. Now, as much as I love these hack and slash games, I cannot deny that they have problems, and they can be pretty big at times. The first and foremost is they almost entirely do away with a lot of that pre-game stuff I was talking about in tab targeting games. Very frequently the armor systems and all of that are very basic and very traditional, and they stay a little bit more true to life than they do for the fantasy setting. So, your big plate armor is obviously better than your light leather armor. But you can't move around as quickly in the plate armor, so you're losing some things when you pick it. When it comes to movesets, there usually aren't any. In fact, I can't actually think of an example where there are any. And when it comes to movesets, there usually aren't any. There's a couple of games that have added a few little moves and special attacks, that kind of thing. But for the most part, most hack and slash games don't have any movesets. There's no skill tree. If there is a skill tree, it's more about passive effects and crafting skills or gathering skills, that kind of thing. Now, this kind of makes sense because the game is entirely about more traditional combat, like striking from this way and that way, and you do have a moveset in a sense that you have multiple ways of doing your basic attacks, and you can choose from a few different weapons to do different things. But overall, in terms of moves, you can't really spin it. There is less choice, and it's definitely a lot less flashy. Now, what I would like to see from future MMOs is kind of a blend of the styles, leaning more on the hack and slash. I love hack and slash's engaging combat, but it's definitely just kind of ignoring the other things you can do with combat out there. Developers are being very uncreative in that they just kind of each do the typical medieval thing. While that medieval combat is cool, who's to say you can't have a hack and slash game in more of a fantasy setting? What I would like to see is a hack and slash MMO where it throws in a moveset and kind of a class system more akin to an action MMO. You could still have things like healers and mages in a hack and slash MMO, and they still use their moves. They just target like any bow and arrow would. Furthermore, even your melee characters could still have special moves, like a big ground slam that does damage in an area around it. There's no reason why that hack and slash idea of being up close and personal with your opponent and having the ability to block their moves and launch yours from different ways can't be applied in a more creative sense. I also really think they should be adding in more of those pre-combat decisions I was talking about in regards to tab targeting MMOs. There's no reason you shouldn't be able to play around with your stats by manipulating your armor and your weapons. It's just another layer you could add to combat. And that's really the point here, is that combat doesn't have to be strong in one area. You need to kind of layer it. You start with that base layer of stats and manipulating it with your armor and weapons. Then you get into choosing abilities that you can use in a fight. And then you get into combat itself, where you try and keep it as engaging and personal as you can, and just aim for that kind of fight for your life feeling. And that's really all I gotta say on the subject for the moment. I really just think companies need to stop focusing on what other companies have done and what are the types of combat out there, and just kind of create their own systems. You don't need to entirely reinvent the wheel, but you also don't need to go with the name brand suppliers. If you want to be the next big MMO, the real WoW killer, then you need to do your own thing. You can't do someone else's thing. Anyway, that's enough of my blabbering. Thank you guys for tuning in and taking the time to listen to me. Again, I am so sorry for the long delay in the videos, and I hope it will not be a problem again in the future. I am just trying to bring you guys the best content I can come up with. If you've got any tips or tricks for me, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. And I'd really like you guys to let me know what you think about combat in MMOs. What's your favorite system that already exists, and what would you like to see in future games? Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you guys later.